music has a way of communicating with us that sometimes just kind of goes beyond words. It's like there's some things that just speaking will not get across, and so you have to add a melody and some swells and some things to really kind of get the feeling behind what you're trying to say communicated. It's like when you score the touchdown on Friday night to win the game, and the joy of the fight song erupts in the crowd as everyone screams with what little voice they have left. It's like the power of a song or a hymn that's being played in a memory unit of a nursing home, and suddenly people are brought back in line with who they were before. And every generation of musicians writes songs that they want to be relatable to people at the time that they're writing them. It's almost as if in putting the words and the melodies together, they're saying you're not alone when they're making these songs. And there's some themes that just kind of keep showing up over and over and over again throughout the generations. You have the Beatles writing a song like Yesterday, or Jackson Browne in the 70s writing Running on Empty, or Hootie and Blowfish when I was in high school writing a song called Time. Every one of them trying to get us to listen to this message that's playing over and over again in each generation. I finally listened to that message when I was in a time in my life where there was just a lot going on. We were packing up and moving to seminary, which was 12 hours away from where Megan and I were living. Oh, by the way, we had been married for maybe a year at this time. I was searching for work. I was trying to find odd jobs to pay bills. I was studying and taking a full load of classes. I was learning what it meant to be in a marriage relationship, and I was busy. And I had a list of things that I still wanted to accomplish that I could never seem to get to. Because whenever I would start to get something off the list, something else would take its place. And so I could just never made up any room. I never got through anything. All I knew is there was a sense of urgency with everything. Everything felt the weight of importance. Everything felt the weight of having to happen right now. Everything felt like it had to be done yesterday. And then Megan comes home and she's like, hey, listen to this new song that from a group she liked called Coldplay was playing. It was called Clocks. And right at the beginning of one of the first verses, it says these words, there are tides that I tried to swim against have brought me to my knees. And here is this song that as it plays and as the clocks tick and as these things going on is reminding me and reminding you that the Rolling Stones got it wrong when they sang time is on my side. Time is not on my side. It is going too fast. That's the language we use when we talk about time, right? We have rush hours. We have priority mail. Time is pressing. Our duties are pressing. And we have more to do and more we want to do than we have hours in the day to get it done. And this is even worse among people who call themselves believers. Robert Banks writes that the upshot of believers' commitment to work, to community, and to family is, as my eldest son commented, Christians are like trains, always on the move, always in a rush, and always late. In other words, we have bought in to an understanding of time that is unhealthy. I mean, we get that time is limited, right? And so for most of us, it comes from a good place. Like, we don't want to waste the time that we have. So we know doom scrolling on TikTok is a waste of time. We know spending hours on YouTube can be a waste of time. But our understanding and our approach to how we see time seems to go beyond it. Because we live in such a way that rest does not exist. Our calendars are full. And we rush from one thing to the next, and we wear it almost as like a badge of honor. Like, think about this for a second. If someone was to ask you how you were doing and you couldn't say busy, how would you feel? How do you think they would judge you? As lazy, as incompetent, as wasteful, as all of these things we don't want to be. I mean, Psalm 90 even calls us to number our days. But it calls us to do it in a way that looks at the eternal impact that we are having. But instead of looking for eternal impact, most of us are just looking at how productive was our use of time today. What did we get off the list? What did we make? How much money came in? How many sales calls did we do? How many books did we read? How many grades did we get done? And we like this because production is easy to count, easy to measure, and it gives us something tangible to hold on to. And we like being productive because it feeds some needs inside of us. It helps tell us who we are. It helps tell us what we're supposed to do. It helps to tell us where we belong. And so a lot of us are busy because it just feeds our egos. It makes us feel important. It makes us feel like we're successful. Like, look at all of the things that I did. And you can put your accomplishments up on a wall, whether it's in your office or on Facebook, and tell everybody, look what I've done with the time I've been given. For others, busyness helps us because it keeps us too busy to do the things that are really important, but hard. And so I don't want to deal with maybe that emotional stuff that happened in my family over there. So instead of dealing with that, or instead of dealing with the loss that I'm going through, or instead of dealing with things that have fallen apart, I'm going to stay over here where I'm really busy. I don't have time for that because I took the overtime at work today. I don't have time for that because now I'm coaching my kids and my neighbor's kids and my ex-wife's kids in soccer. We like staying busy because we have upside down priorities. Priorities that keep us busy because we never have enough of what we're looking for. We never have enough money or enough power. We never have enough praise from people who like what we've done for them. We never have enough positions. We never have enough security. We stay busy because we can't say no to everyone else and their demands on us. And it's easier to fill our schedules and let them control what we're doing than to do it for ourselves. And so if any of those things make sense to you, then you are one of those people that often, like me, finds ourselves in a place where we are worried about time because there just isn't enough of it. And what time has done is time has taken the place of control. And it's demanding that we do something with it. So if we're not producing something, then it's not worth our time. We have to get busy and we have to stay busy. Like Chuck Swindoll puts it this way, he says, work becomes a source of our identity. In other words, how we are using our time in productive ways becomes who we are. So when work becomes the source of identity, the answer to problems is work harder. And a sign of faithfulness is serving to the point of burnout. It's a far cry from the life most of us want to live. And yet we don't know how to get out of it because this is the only way we know to approach time. And yet this way of approaching time pulls us away from the purpose and plans of God in our life, even though we're so busy. Because as followers of Christ, we're called to some certain things, like connecting people to the real life that's found in Him. And productivity, let's be honest with ourselves here for a second, can get in the way of this. Because connecting people to real life in Christ happens through relationship. It happens through time together. And relationships aren't fast. And you don't always get immediate results. And when you have to go from one task to the next, how often do you even have time to stay with each other and make space to be vulnerable and open with each other? Because that's risky. And you've got to build trust before you can get to that point. And so we are a people who have forgotten about Sabbath rest. And taking time to smell the roses or enjoy life or take a nap is looked at as a missed opportunity. Because time is calling the shots. And for some of us, we've gotten so busy that we've never taken the time to see who we really are. We've never taken the time to see if we're going in the right direction, but we can sure tell you that we are making great time. When Jesus steps into the scene in the book of Mark, he points us at another approach to time and busyness. Now, it's interesting that this is taking place a lot in the Gospel of Mark because Mark is the action gospel. He cuts out all of the fluff and he goes from one thing to the next. He uses words like immediately and instantly a lot. And yet here it is in this place that we learn how time is supposed to be approached for people who follow Christ. In Mark chapter 1, verse 29, it says, as soon as, there's that language, as soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they immediately told Jesus about her. So he went to her, took her hand, and helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. That evening, after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went to a solitary place where he prayed. Jesus' compassion creates this incredible stir in the town of Capernaum. He's healed one, and soon the whole town is surrounding the house where that healing has taken place, where Jesus is at. And they are pressing in on him, not just with their bodies and with their needs, but with their expectations that he can do something about it. And he uses every second of that day into the night, past when the sun has gone down, to meet the needs of those that have gathered there. And then at some point, when it is still dark out, he slips away to go spend time with his Father. You see, to Jesus, nothing was as important or as valuable as those moments with his Father. Even those needs that he left in the dark outside that house were not as important or valuable as this moment was going to be. Because when he was with his Father, a few things were happening for him. It was with his Father that Jesus was again given his identity. He was being reminded again because of whose he was, he could know who he was. That he was the Lord's Son, beloved. He was not his work. Even if he had never done any of those miracles, he was still loved. And because of that identity, he could spend time just enjoying being with his Father. And his Father in that time would empower Christ and give him the purpose. Because if you know whose you are, you know who you are. If you know who you are, you will know what to do. So he had identity. He had purpose. He had direction. He had empowerment. He had all of the things that our approach to time tries to give us as we run ourselves into the ground. And yet the story keeps going. Simon and his companions went to look for him. And when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." Jesus replied, "Let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come." So he traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in the synagogues and driving out demons. Simon has missed the point, right? You would think that as follower of Jesus, he would get that when Jesus went away to be with his Father, that was the most important thing. Jesus' actions and his words have proven that this was the time that he needed. But instead of protecting that time, he and the other disciples run off to find Jesus and interrupt that time. Because he was just wasting the time. What was more important was getting Jesus back to keep doing the work, to keep being productive and healing and casting out demons there in Capernaum. I mean, the people were lined up and ready to go, and they were expecting him back. And you know that people's expectations put pressure on you, right? So he needed to stop enjoying being in God's presence, being unproductive, and get back there. But instead of replying, "Oh, of course," Jesus gave a different answer. He said, "It's time to go." It's not because he didn't have compassion on those who still had need in Capernaum, but he was focused. He knew who he was, and he knew what he was supposed to do. He knew why he had come. And if he stayed busy meeting all the needs in that place, then he would miss out on the things he was actually supposed to be doing. You see, he had to keep reminding the disciples of this because the pressure of letting time be in control was so great. Time couldn't be in control. God had to be in control of how they used their time. And so in Mark chapter 6, he sends them off, and they go and they heal, and they teach, and they preach the good news, and then they come back to Jesus, and they start to tell him all of the things that they've done. And they list off in the language that keeps saying everything. They want to emphasize. They listed everything they said, everything they did, everywhere they went. And really it's like a, look what we did. Look at how accomplished we are. Look at how successful we've been. Okay, we're ready to move on. What's next? What's next? Let's keep this going. We got to keep the momentum moving, right? But instead of giving them more work orders, Jesus takes them to a solitary place. It says they were so busy doing things that they had neglected their physical bodies and hadn't even taken time to eat. And they had definitely neglected their spiritual health, failing to take time to hear from the Father. And so even though they were doing good things, they were finding all of their identity and their value in the doing of them. And they'd forgotten who they belonged to in the first place. They'd gotten their priorities out of order. You see, our priorities are based on who we belong to. What's most important to us? Whose values are we following? If we belong to time, if we belong to work, if we belong to this identity that says we always have to be productive, we always have to be doing, then we will always be too busy. And the result will be that we are exhausted and we are burning out, and we will trail behind us all of these regrets of what we could not get to, and a pile of guilt for what is still undone. But if we belong to Christ, if we belong to Christ, then time is not a master, but a tool to be able to do what God has called us to do. And let me tell you something. God knows what he's called you to, and he knows how much time is in a day, and those two things will line up. So instead of worshiping the work, instead of being thankful and proud of the busyness in our life, God has invited us to stop and to worship Him. It's one of the 10 commandments, to come and be before God and not to be productive and not to get a lot done or accomplished, but just to make space to be with Him. To be reminded that we find our identity there as beloved children of God and not in what we've done. To find there the ability to stop and make space. To not feel like some things are so urgent, to not feel like everything has to be frantic, and to find rest for our souls. That we might be empowered by the one who calls us to do the things that He calls us to do, whatever those happen to be. And I'll tell you, sometimes the things He's going to call you to are to stop and smell the roses. Rick Warren always likes to say that sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is take a nap. It's going to encourage you to make space, to be vulnerable, because if connecting with other people and with God is so important, then it's going to take time. It's going to create space to be vulnerable, which requires trust, which takes time. Which means you can't always worry about being productive in order to connect in a quality way with somebody else. And oh, by the way, when you're rushing around from one thing to the next, God may be calling you to be interrupted from time to time for those other things that He's called you to. Because other people's schedules are not your schedules, and other people's time is not your time, and God, who sees it all, may have orchestrated an appointment that you didn't have on your agenda. And so the prayer for us is really to look at whose priorities are we living by. The priorities of time and work and the world that says you've got to be productive, you've got to be busy, and you've got to do it to the detriment of yourself, your relationships with others, and your relationship with God? Or do we find ourselves and our identity in Him, who calls us to come and rest from time to time, to go and get away, because it is so important to be with Him? I love how Paul puts it in the Message version of Romans chapter 12. So here's what I want you to do, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for Him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God, and you'll be changed from the inside out. Heavenly Father, I pray that you would help to remind us about who we really belong to. Who is the master that we are called to serve? Whose values do we carry? Lord, I pray that it would be yours and that you would help us to approach time in a way that reminds us that the rush is not from you. You've called us to do things, good works you've prepared in advance, but you will have us do them on a timetable that fits the other things you have called us to find our identity in you, to connect with others and point them to Christ, to be reminded that we are beloved even before we do anything. So help us to not feel so overwhelmed by the pressures that say we have to keep doing, that we fail to make space in our lives for those vital relationships, the things we were actually made for, that we find in you and those you have called us to. May we fix our attention on you, that we might be changed from the inside out. Pray this in your name.